Mr. Rafiq Ahmed, respected President of the DMK party, Thiru Stalin, fellow business leaders, members of parliament, members of the Legislative Assembly. When I was approached to speak this evening, I had a certain amount of hesitation, not because I did not want to participate in this function and pay my homage to our late departed and beloved leader. But I felt I was too small to stand up in this forum and speak about him. And also I was a bit worried because it's always very difficult to talk about someone you knew so well and you admired and respected. And I was afraid that I would perhaps choke with emotion. Nevertheless, I thought this was one opportunity for me to publicly pay homage to the greatest son of Tamil Nadu and the greatest son of Thiru, from where my family hails. I think the speakers before me have spoken at length about his tremendous contribution to industrial development and growth in Tamil Nadu over the years, and I do not want to repeat, especially considering there are other speakers to follow me and it's also rather late in the evening. I would just like to briefly talk about the manner in which a lot of these attributes which are talked about had a very significant bearing in the sugar industry. And I thank Dr. Peresami for not, even though he spoke ahead of me, he did not specifically talk about sugar. But I think he did make a tremendous contribution to the development of the sugar industry. I think he saw the sugar industry as an engine for rural development, perhaps the only industry which perforce had to be located in rural areas. And when he saw the kind of development which had happened in and around the sugar mill areas, he saw the tremendous potential it had to improve the lives of farmers as a cash crop, sugarcane being a cash crop, and also in terms of generating both direct and indirect employment in rural areas, where generally most other industries were not finding their way. And his own thinking also in terms of the development of the industry evolved with the times. As someone earlier put it, I mean, he always moved along with change. And if one goes back to the 70s, his term during 1971 to 76, the focus and thrust was to set up more sugar mills in the cooperative and public sector. And in fact, during that period, no private sector participation was encouraged. However, during the 80s, the policy changed, mainly because the state government also did not have the funds to make investments in the equity capital of the cooperatives and public sector. So perforce private sector mills had to be licensed, and quite a few of them were licensed in 1987. When Dr. Kalaignar came back to power in 1989, some of those who had obtained these licenses were somewhat apprehensive whether he might still want to encourage the private sector in the sugar industry. But to our pleasant surprise, and of course many of us had known him earlier and met with him even when he was not in power, he encouraged us to go ahead with the projects, and he realized the constraints in terms of the cooperatives and the public sector mills. And he went a step further during the period 96 to 2001 when again, at the time he came back into the government, few other private sector mills had also been licensed. But likewise, in the earlier case, he had made sure that these mills were given whatever was required to go ahead and put up these projects. And subsequently, in 2006, 2011, he came out with a new policy where all new sugar mills were required to set up distilleries and cogeneration plants so that the sugar complex itself would be more viable as an economic entity and would enable the farmers to realize a much better price for their product. And this really was the golden period for the sugar industry, 2006 to 11. I believe at least 9 sugar complexes were licensed during this period. And this was also the first state in the entire country where this kind of a policy was implemented. In fact, some of us feel that perhaps if he had continued, the industry may not have found itself in the dire straits it has been in the recent past. I now would like to digress a little bit out of the industry-specific experience that we had with him. He was always, more from a personal standpoint, he was always available to all of us collectively as an association to go and discuss our problems. In fact, we very rarely had to ask him to lend his ears because even when we met him on other matters, he would always ask us about what was happening in the industry and how the industry was doing. And I personally had no difficulty at all in getting an appointment from him. And always, it was a very personable experience. And what struck me most was that he still remembered the good old days when he still was in Thiru. He would always regale me with stories relating to my grandfather and my father, which even I myself had never known earlier. And invariably, he would always send, in typical Tanjavur style, he would always send for a Vetala Pak before he finished the appointment. And likewise, I was never in awe of him as chief minister. I think generally when you meet someone in power, you tend to be a little intimidated, you tend to be tentative. But with him, I was more in awe of him as a person and not with all the trappings of power. In fact, he related to me, and I'm sure to most of the others here would have had the same experience, on a one-to-one basis as an equal, not as someone in power and someone who had come to discuss some issue with him. I think this is really the most admirable quality which I found in him. And also whatever he did in terms of fostering industrial peace also ensured that in the sugar industry, we had a well-set pattern of settling our disputes with labor, whether it was wage settlements or whatever. There was always a tripartite forum, and always proper guidance would be given to all sides to ensure that the talks were successful and there was no breakdown of industrial relations. Likewise, we have a much larger constituency in our industry, which is the sugarcane farmers, and always fixing the price turns out to be a very vexatious issue. And even here, he was one of the first to institute a tripartite forum for discussing the cane price. And once he learned that the forums are also becoming forum for mudslinging, etc., he said, look, okay, call the farmers as well as the millers on the same day in the same place, but talk to them separately, and then you find a consensus solution. I think this was his full sagacity in terms of being able to address every constituency and not just take one side or the other. I think in all that he did, I think I would also like to make a brief reference also to his great concern for both workmen, employees, and also for the environment. I do distinctly recall on one occasion when we had requested permission to shift one of our units to a different location because we did not have enough cane available. And when I met him to get the final clearance, he said, "But why are you doing this? What will happen to all the workmen? Where will they get employment, particularly in your district, where our district, where there are no other industries?" And then I said, "Look, what we can do is we will move them and also provide them with a relocation allowance." And he said, "Make sure you do that." And on that condition, he cleared the proposal. And even till this date, we continue to pay that relocation allowance, though most of them probably have retired and gone by now. And when it came to the environment, he was the one Dr. Kalaignar was the one who in 1989 instructed that no highly polluting industry can be set up within 1 kilometer of certain designated rivers within the state. And this was because a lot of complaints had reached him about discharge of effluents into the rivers. He didn't stop at that, and in fact, when he came back to power in '97, he made it even more stringent, and the 1 kilometer became 5 kilometers. And basically, this was a big issue in districts like Tanjavur, where you can hardly find a 5-kilometer location which is not within the Kaveri or any of its many branches. So when I went and pointed this out to him and said that, "Look, you've made sure that you've now effectively ensured that no process industry can come up in this district," he was taken aback, but then he said, "Look, I have to look at the state as a whole. My constituency is not just Tanjavur. It is all the entire state of Tamil Nadu, and I have to do what is good for the well-being and in the interest of the entire state." On that note, I would like to conclude my humble homage to our departed leader, and by saying, I don't think there'll ever be anyone like him again. Thank you.